Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
This Shabbat is Shabbat Terumah, and it is one of my favorite stories or parts of the Torah. Some maybe would find it more technical, but somebody who wanted to be an architect, for me, it's a pleasure to hear about the construction of the temple. Now, where we are is the after receiving the Ten Commandments and after Mishpatim last Shabbat, establishing the justice system and the justice system is really where we create God's home or dwelling because God cannot stand us being sinful towards each other or definitely abusing each other, cheating each other. So to be the best place for God to dwell in is a place that there's justice. So that had to precede the building of the Mishkan. So Mishkan literally means the place of dwelling, and that is it's called the tent of meeting. So it's not a permanent bricks and mortar temple yet. That will happen many years later, hundreds of years later, in the time of King Solomon. But and that's our haftarah, the part that we read today from the prophets or the writings is the story of King Solomon building the first permanent building and temple. But where we are now is where we are ready to, for the first time in the Israelites' journeys, again, they just became a nation and the stamp for being a nation under God. I'm going to be using a lot of terminology that will be very familiar to you from the American story, because the American story, of course, is built on the Judeo-Christian tradition. So this is the when the Israelites decide or accept God's a new idea in this world that you don't need a king, flesh and blood king. It's God will be the king, and everybody else will have inalienable rights. Everybody is equal in the eyes of the law, and it's the idea of the people, the Congress, that will decide the how to live according to or in a deliberation among themselves. It won't be dictated from above by one person that wants to subjugate the people. That's really the idea. It's flipping the Egyptian pyramid. That's how I like to call it, because literally there was one person at the top enslaving everybody else. Now we're flipping, the people are at the top, and the person who serves the community is really a server. He's not, he's a serving, he's not dictating. So that's really where we are. So for that reason of creating the dwelling of God, there are, of course, many questions that we have to ask. First of all, we know that in Judaism, we don't believe in the anthropomorphic representation of God. God is not physical in any way. So, how important is it to create a physical place for a God that is not physical, or it doesn't even make sense? So we'll read that God says to them, I build me a sanctuary and I will dwell among them. which means I will not dwell in the sanctuary per se. Yes, of course, the representation, the glory of God will be represented in different ways, and we'll, of course, look into all these things in the Mishkan, in the sanctuary. But God will dwell somewhere else, and that's it among them. So, what is among them? And now this is the first step to understanding the construction of the house of God. So it begins by God asking Moshe to speak to the people and to take a donation. The word Terumah in Hebrew means donation. So donation, as opposed to tax, as opposed to a levy, any tariff, is different. Why? What is Terumah? Terumah, a donation, it comes from the heart. So it's the first clue of where the real foundations of the house of God, where are the foundations? The foundations are in the heart. So if the heart of the people is not in there, then it doesn't matter. That house is just a physical structure. And we know later on, many, many, many years later, when the temples were destroyed, we know that that is the reason. I mean, of course, there were battled with the Babylonians, with the Assyrians, with the Romans, but essentially, what we say that caused the exile or the destruction of the temple was because our heart was not in the right place, whether it was not in the right place in relationship between people or or the relationship between people and God. So the donation is the first thing. God is telling us something very, very important here. God is telling us that He does not need our money or our contribution. God needs our donation as a mechanism to bring our heart in, which means because it's not a tax, it's not a tariff or a levy, it is a donation. So we decide how much we donate. And God said clearly and very directly, every person that Israelite that will bring it from every person's heart. And I love the word in Hebrew, yidvenu libo. It's not that the heart comes first, is the need of the heart or the willingness of the heart comes first. Okay, so we know this is the number one concept and foundation of building the house of God. There's a conversation between Maimonides and Nachmanides. Now, again, they didn't meet each other. They didn't know each other in real life. Maimonides died shortly after Nachmanides was born, but these are kind of the two giants we had in two different camps because they each represent just to kind of in broad strokes. Maimonides was the kind of the rational person, and Nachmanides was the more esoteric. So Nachmanides says that in order to pray, you should really feel it in your heart. When your heart is in need, then you pray to God. Maimonides says, no, you pray all the time, whether your heart moves you to pray or not, you should have the mechanism of praying. So In Hebrew, it's called keva and kavana. It's the routine of praying. You have to have a routine, and on the other hand, you have to have the intention of praying. So, of course, if you have both, that is the best. But if you have only one, you never had a routine, but one day something happens to you and it moves your heart to pray to God, by all means, you do it. So, but that conversation tells us that you need the heart to speak to God in any way. So we build the house of God in the same way that we pray to God, because it is a house of prayer. The tent of meeting God. God tells us right away, I will meet you at your heart. So, and prayer comes from the heart. So it is a house of prayer, house of meeting with God, which means such a very beautiful concept that to meet with God is through prayer. Of course, it's through action, through other things, but it is definitely the real meeting with God is through the contemplation, through prayer. So God says, okay, if you are your heart will move you to bring the donation. These are the donations that I need. I need gold, silver, copper, blue, purple, crimson yarns, fine linen, and goat's hair. So these are and also tan ram skins, dolphin skins, and acacia wood. Then just to build it, but then you have to have oil for the lighting, spices for the anointing oil, and for aromatic incense. And then it says lapis and other stones for starting or setting in the ephod. Ephod is the breastplate of the high priest. Um, and then it said at the end, he says, and let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. So that is the the introduction to building the house of God. Now, it sounds like simple. Yes, of course, this is you need all these materials, but let's not forget what these the most important ingredient here, which is the heart. Okay, so make me a sanctuary, so I will dwell among them in their heart, and then God directs Moses in an interesting way here, because he says, um, if again you can choose to participate in this or not, but if you do, I have a very exact prescription of how I want things to be and to run. So I always compare it to a big celebrity coming to stay at a hotel, and they call the hotel before to make arrangement, or let's say royalty. They come to a place, or presidents, or prime ministers. So they have their needs, right? They have the security needs. They have the needs that they need for their entourage, and things that they personally need in order to sleep, in order to they have maybe some medical reasons to for their demands and stuff, everything else. So um, I know that there are people who ask for certain food, or to have five rooms in one floor so they can have their staff next to them. So that is what God is saying to us. In order for me to dwell among you, to come from heaven, so to speak, and have a footstool in on earth, these are the measurements, or these are the requirements that I need in order to do that, that it'll fit, right? So if somebody can't sleep on a soft mattress, he's not going to sleep well if you're going to provide a soft mattress. So God is telling us, if you want me to dwell among you in a perfect way, this is what I need. So we start with the heart, we said, right? So the structure of the temple, the tent of meeting itself, the whole with the yard, with the tent, with the holy vessels, um, mimic that. It mimics the heart, and everything goes out of the heart, projecting out. Now, what also projects out? Light. Light projects out. So if I would add now another image to this whole thing, think of a heart that has reflection of light out of it. So the Mishkan is built from the heart. And what is the heart? The heart is the Holy of Holies. And then we have holy, and then the yard, and then the fence. So why do you need to have those designations? So God is separate from us. God is holy. And holy means separate. And God is holy, 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 right? He's separate 3 times. So it's not just because God wants to be separate, but and God tells us, if you come in contact with me, you will die. Because there's no way to insert infinity into a finite. And since we are finite creatures, if we come in direct contact with God somehow, we will break, we will explode. It's the breaking of the vessels. If you've ever heard this terminology, that if you put something in the vessel that is too overwhelming for it, it'll break, of course. So God has to stay separate from everybody else. So again, and it's a representation of God's glory. It's not God in the physical. But what is now the physical representation of God? What would be the closest of from God? Now, on a personal level, right? When God created Adam and Eve, what did He do? Or created Adam first. He took clay or from the earth and structured or designed the human being, and then He blew the spirit into his nostrils. So that's why prayer is also a direct access to God, because it's the breath. And actually, halacha, the Jewish law, says that you have to at least mumble a little bit. You have to bring some breath out of your mouth for the prayer to be totally kosher. So because that's the connection, is the breath. So the breath of God now imagine the tent of meeting as another creation, another what we call a foreshadowing, or it's a typology. It's a typology of the same kind of idea, just on different levels. So that typology, if we take it as God is creating another human being, but on a greater scale, on a national scale, and then it'll fall into place. So the breath that God has to inject into that structure would be something from Him, right? Same thing as the breath of God. And that's why that breath is also the infinite part of a human being. It never dies. It may separate from the body, but it still is housed somewhere else in this world. So, what was something that came out of God's breath to the people? We just had the Sinai event, the revelation in Mount Sinai, where God spoke the 10 utterances. And then he gave Moshe the tablets that were written, the 10 commandments were written on it. So, in a sense, the word of God is is represented in those tablets. So those tablets are now going to be that breath that has to be in the center of everything. So, but you can't just put those tablets on the floor. You have to house it in somewhere. So the Ark of the Covenant is the first vessel that God commands us to build, and with very specific measurement. They make an art of acacia wood. Again, acacia wood is a very simple wood, but then you cover it with gold, and then it'll be half cubit long and a cubit and a half wide. So it's not a big ark, but it houses the tablets, and then it says overlay it with pure gold, overlay it inside and out. Okay, so just this phrase is very, very loaded. It says overlay it with pure gold, overlay it inside and out, or I would not even say and out, inside out, and I'll explain, and make upon it a gold molding round about. So, two things just in this phrase of overlay it with pure gold inside out. The Midrash says that the word gold, or the metal itself, is a material that came to this world for one reason, and that reason was to imitate light, is to be the physical representation of light. Now, because God cannot be with us physically, as we describe, he can only be here metaphorically. Of course, the glory of God, he appears in materials that are not material. Fire, smoke, right? He appeared to Moshe in the burning bush, which is fire, but you can't contain fire, right? He appears as smoke, as all the derivatives of that. So, so in order for us to represent or have the feeling of God among us, gold is the closest material that imitates light, which is God. So light also, as we said, comes out of the center and expands. And if you think of the mission of the Jewish people, we are supposed to be the light upon the nations, right? To reflect, to live Jewish life, to live the holy life, and then it'll reflect itself naturally if it's done right. You can't pretend light. It's like trying to pretend feeling. You can't. It's either you have it or you don't. And if you, in order to have that light, you have to do something right, and that something right is to come from the heart. So, getting back to the ark itself, is the container of that light. And guess what? The word aron in Hebrew, the ark, is the container of light, because the word or in Hebrew is light, and aron has the root of the word light. So it's the container of light, lest we think that it's the container of the tablets. Yes, the tablets are there, but really it's the container of the light that has to come from out of the Ten Commandments. The word Torah itself that we have received in Aramaic, it sounds even closer to the word light, or oraita. It's the reflection of light. So when we're dealing with the meeting with God, with the construction of the tent of meeting that imitates a human being and the connection, the meeting with God, it's all about that light. So and then the second part of it, it says overlay it inside out. So why does it matter if we say inside out or outside in, or God could have said, and just cover the whole thing with gold? Inside out is, and I remember the first time I learned about it when I was in yeshiva, and it changed my life. These things, the rabbis that taught me, I mean, I'm sure they know the power of Torah, but this is how it translates, the power of Torah. You hear this idea, and all of a sudden, a lot of things make sense, and then you start operating that way. So inside out means that if we're talking about the heart of a human being, it represents that idea too, that things have to be right on the inside first, inside out. You can't just live and pretend to have a relationship with God and just to go with the motion. It has to come from the inside out. And that really is a beautiful, beautiful idea that God is telling us. Okay, and then it's telling us to create four rings to it, and so you could put the staves, you can put the carriers within it, the holder, the poles that you lift the ark with. And it's very interesting because this is the only vessel, holy vessel, and we'll look at the other vessels now, but it's the only vessels that God tells us not to remove the staves from the poles from it. So even when it arrives somewhere physically and permanently, those handles, those poles should never leave the ark. And why is that? For two reasons. One, you can say, just practically, if you have to, you're under attack and you have to remove the ark immediately and hide it somewhere or run away with it, it's already there. That's great. The second, and I love this interpretation that says that because even when the Torah, the ark, will arrive a permanent place one day in the time of King Solomon, never look at the Torah as stationary. It's Torah Chaim, the Torah of life. So it has to dwell. It has to move. And that really is that's the idea. And actually, before King David, King Solomon's father, asks the Nathan, the prophet, about building the house for God, he comes back the first time. He comes back with an answer to King David that says, "Who asked you to build a cedar home for me? I'm dwelling in a tent, and I love it. I don't need to dwell in a cedar home. I like the fact that I transition, that I can go between the different tribes and move around." So this is what God is telling us here, that the Torah is a moving Torah. And I'll give an example, and we talked about it last Shabbat a little bit. When Barry asked about the slavery, that clearly, when the first commandment in Parashat Mishpatim last Shabbat was, if you have a Hebrew slave, they should be freed after 6 years. So a legitimate question is, wait a minute, this is clearly there's slavery here still. Um, what is it about? How should we interpret it in a way to understand that the Torah is actually a house of freedom versus a house of slavery in Egypt? So the answer that I gave him there really is I think manifests itself right here in that idea of not taking the poles off the rings, because if the Torah has to move, it means that it always starts at a certain position, a certain point, but it'll progress from there. And if we look, for example, at even the American Revolution and the Constitution, and then the Civil War that happened much later, about I would say what about almost 100 years later, the in the Constitution itself, right? It says that everybody is was born free, and we have the inalienable rights, and we are everybody is equal. So what happened in the Constitution in 1789? You say that everybody's equal, but yet most of the people who signed the Constitution, the 56 people who signed the Constitution, I don't know for a fact, but I think most of them, if not all of them, owned slaves. So what is that about? This is exactly what it's about. Right now, yes, we just came out of slavery. There is slavery. But the Torah is telling us, don't project on where we are, because the point is to move forward, and eventually we'll get there. So it took until 1850 to have the Civil War, but then the slaves were freed, at least legally. And again, even then, there was a progress in freeing them. So that's really what it means. So we're building a structure that's supposed to move with the generations and have to be reinterpreted every generation. Okay, then it says, beautiful, beautiful idea. You should put the cherubim, create a cherubim, make a cherub at one end, and then the other end of the top of the Ark of the Covenant, the cover, as we call kaporet. And those two cherubs, the Midrash tells us that they looked like a baby son and a baby girl. So they're, but it means that it's not. It doesn't represent any. It just means that it's a relationship of the male and the female, but not sexual at the, of course. But it's the camaraderie. And those cherubim, it says, you shall have their wings spread out above, shielding the cover with their wings. They shall confront each other, meaning they will face each other, and they also will have being turned towards the cover. So it'll be like an angle of looking at each other, but looking at the cover, which means looking at the Torah. So what God is telling us, the perfect position of, this is an example for us to see, is to look at God, the Torah, and each other at the same time. And we know from many depictions that the way we depict the Jewish people, of course, the two tablets, everybody does the two tablets because it says in the text, but not everybody writes five commandments and five commandments on each. The Christians write 3 and 7, for example, because they see the first three as the relationship with God, and the seven, relationship between man and God. But we see 5 and 5 equally, and the Shabbat and honoring parents we include in the relationship between man and God. So either way, we have those two tablets that represent those two ideas of looking at God and looking at at other human beings, and that's really to live fully. You have to have both angles. You look at the same time. You look at God and you look at man. I'll give you an example of also something that we normally talk about when we on the high holidays. We definitely mention it. Is the Talmud talks about questions that we will be asked when we go up to heaven. And the first question is, were you honest in business? But literally it asked, did you negotiate in faith? So negotiate in faith means when you had a deal now, or when you sold the 2 pounds of potatoes, was your scale correct? Was that other, when you put the 2 pound metal on the other side of the scale to even it, was it really 2 pounds, or did you shave some of it at night and it was less than 2 pounds? So and you sold but you did still sell 2 pounds of or you charged for 2 pounds of tomatoes or potatoes. That's the negotiating in faith. But what it means is when you looked at your customer, at the other human being, were you also looking at the Torah at the same time? Did you have faith that God is looking at you now? That's the way to conduct a just society. And as we mentioned from the beginning, and that's the structure of the parashot, of the text that we read, mimics that, because we learn about the justice system before we even come to build the tent of meeting with God. So we know that everything, all the mechanisms that we build in this world have to serve eventually one purpose, and that is to create a just society. And the just society starts with each of our hearts. So justice and love and that warmth that has to be in the heart. Because if you don't have that, it'll be very easy to cheat, to kill. If you think of the Nazis, of how they treated the people like they had no feelings for them, and they saw them as potatoes, and it's okay then to violate all their rights. So that's the idea, and they have to look at each other. And the Talmud has a whole section about speaking about those cherubs, that they are the litmus test. They are the indicator of if God and the people of Israel are in good relationship. If God, this is the barometer of the relationship. If those two angels like look at each other, then that's okay. So God's face is facing us. But if not, if they face away from each other, then God is not in a good place with us, and something bad may come and approach. So, um, and again, those cherubs are a reflection of who we are as the people. It's telling God, are they looking at each other, the people of Israel, or are they friction? They have all the factions and all they cheat each other. They don't look at each other's face. And a lot of times you see when somebody is being dishonest, or they're doing something that they know they're doing something wrong, definitely against you, they don't look at you. They can't look you in the eye. And when we say to people, look me in the eye and say that, right? That's the whole point, is that we face each other. So if that doesn't happen, then we're not doing something right. Okay, so this is the just the first holy vessel in this whole structure, and it has the most, of course, loaded meanings in that sense of the relationship between God and man, and it is housed in the Holy of Holies, and only one time, one person enters one place a year, and that's the high priest on Yom Kippur enters the Holy of Holies, which takes us now to this idea of what creates a holy place. So there are different ways to create a holy place, and holy, as we say, the word holy simply means separate or designated. So if that place is designated, it's a clue of how to create a holy place. So there are holy places that God told us that they're holy. For example, when Moses met God in the burning bush, God said to him, when he calls on Moses, Moses, and he says, take your shoes off because this is a holy ground. So that's one way to learn that a place is holy. Now, again, that holy place, we don't even know where it is now. We came back after to receive the Torah there. That was Mount Sinai too. But there are places that are holy for the time. And then either we don't know where they are or it doesn't matter because they were holy for that space, for that time. Then we have holy places that that were designated by God through an event that happened there, and then we commemorate it as a holy place. So Mount Moriah, for example, Abraham sacrificed or was going to sacrifice Isaac there, and we say, okay, this is now a holy place for us forever. And there are places that we ourselves designate as holy. What is a good example? If we build a synagogue. If we build a synagogue, we decided now that it's a holy place. So we decide that we made it holy. We consecrated, and then it is holy as long as, of course, it's a synagogue where it reflects the holiness that we built it for. So these are three ways to create a holy place. But a holy place, of course, means that there's certain reverence that we have to feel in that place, and we have to act in a certain way. So the first thing of holiness, the first designation of holy, means that there's holy and then there's outside of the boundary. So there's boundaries to the holiness or to the space. So the which means that it's segregated again in a good way. It's not the word segregation, of course, very loaded here, but to segregate, which means that the high priest can walk into the holy of holies, that time of year, one time, one place, one person. And God tells us if a stranger or somebody who is not designated as the high priest to enter, they will die immediately. Now we have the holy, and the holy is where the rest of the vessels are. If a lay, there are, of course, the lay priests that supposed to work in that area. But if you have somebody who's not supposed to be in that area, if they enter there, they die on the spot. God showed it to us very clearly in the inauguration later on, and when they finished this whole thing, and the tent of meeting is inaugurated. Literally that day, the first time that the priests were supposed to bring the first offering to start this machine, the two sons of Aaron died on the spot. Why? Because they did something wrong. They crossed the boundaries. It said they brought a foreign fire. So they did not adhere to the exact commandments of God in this way. Now you can say, "Wow, but this is is this a vengeful God? Is this an angry God? This is why act like this? Why kill the two sons of the high priest on the inauguration of the temple? What's supposed to be the most the happiest, the jubilee of this whole event. Why do it? The way I compare it to is I compare it to a nuclear power. I know we're just before the whatever will happen in Iran, but the nuclear power is very clearly powerful. And so it's you have to be very, very careful, because otherwise if that nuclear power plant explodes, we know what happened in Chernobyl, and we know what happened in Japan when the storm came and really risked the plant. So you have to be very, very careful with it. So it's not so much about that God is vengeful, but you have to understand that God is bringing nuclear power to earth. That's what it means. For God to come and dwell on earth, it's think of the sun that is how many times more powerful than any nuclear power, right? So God is even above the sun. So think of that power of light contained in whatever it is. It's very powerful, and that's why you have to be very delicate, and there's very precise ways to treat it and measurements and all the rest. Okay. We will just very briefly read the rest of the vessels, and you should have a table that set the bread of display before me always. And this bread, the miraculous part of this bread was that it was never stale. Bread is always stale the next day. You can have any type of bread, but what's common with all bread is that the next day it's starting to get stale. So of course, because it's in front of the Holy of Holies in the holy section, it gets that power of God, and it never goes stale. It represents the tree of life. God is the tree of life, or the Torah is the tree of life that keeps projecting energy, and that's why Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden did not die, because they were in the proximity of the Garden of Eden. When once they were expelled from the proximity of the tree of life, they started dying, or like the bread becoming stale. So this is where we also get what is more known in the Christian imagery when Jesus says, "This is my body." So the bread. It comes from Judaism, of course. The bread is the body, and it's a representation of not dying when you're in the presence of the tree of life. Then we have the six branches of the there's a menorah. You shall make a lampstand of pure gold. The lampstand shall be made of hammered work, meaning it would be one piece. Its base and its shaft, its cups, and the petals and everything that is part of it is one. Is basically creating a mold and pouring the gold into one mold. And then it says six branches shall issue from its side, three branches from one side and three on the other side. And they'll have the branches each will have the cups of where you put the oil, of course, and the almond blossom under each one. And so actually, when we talk about a Jewish symbol, the menorah is really the symbol of the Jewish people. This is a new thing that nobody had. We tend to think that the Star of David is the emblem of the Jewish people, but it really is not, because it existed in other societies, ancient societies as well. But actually, the emblem of the state of Israel, therefore, is the menorah with the two olive branches on the side. The flag, which is of course something more modern, had the Star of David because that became somehow more recognized with the Jewish people. But the real emblem is the menorah, and of course, think of the significance of it, because it holds literal light. And as we say, this is all about the variations of light and reflecting light, and the rabbis teach us that the menorah outside the Ark of the Covenant, the outside of the Holy of Holies, there's a curtain between them, is a reflection of the written Torah, the tablets, and the oral Torah, the lived Torah. So they are on the two sides of that curtain. And then we have the Mishkan itself that we can talk about another time. So to summarize this whole thing about the structure of the temple and what it means, you can see that the main uh, concepts here are the intention. God wants the relationship. It's the tent of meeting. So it has to come from the heart, and it has to be genuine. And the way we know that it's genuine is when it reflects the light out. So that's kind of in the summary of what it means to bring the light of heaven to earth in a container of light on earth among the people.